that's where you're wrong. There's a market out there greedy for gold, and they don't care where it comes from.
Ah, the sweet smell of an all-day sucker.
Keep a cool head, Carlberg. Don't you need? And more would be great. Well, I guess you could call me greedy.
This is Greedville, the podcast about marketing and so much more. No city limits, no traffic lights, no apologies. And here is your host, Victor J. Massaud.
Let's talk about business and wealth. And let me ask you a couple of questions, and then I'll pose them to the class as well. Do you have a desire to be wealthy?
Yes.
Do you come from a wealthy family?
I would say we're pretty well off, like upper middle class.
Upper middle class.
Yeah, like we're comfortable.
And do you aspire
to do like spontaneous things if we wanted?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Okay, so you have a little more flexibility than maybe a lot of people would have in terms of being able to take risks.
Yes.
Do you do you aspire to be more than upper middle class, or do you aspire to live a middle class existence that was as comfortable as your parents?
I would probably say like probably like very similar to my parents, especially like with this type of like with going into marketing and management. It's like I guess I could be like super wealthy, but it isn't as realistic as just being upper middle, which I would be fine with because I don't know if I really like love that lifestyle of being like insanely wealthy.
Right. Okay. So if I were to give you a scale of 1 to 10, how desirous would you say you are for being wealthy?
I would say probably 7 or 8. Like it's pretty. I mean, I want to be like successful and a lot of money. So right now, like my dreams are like obviously bigger. So I'm like, I would love to be wealthy as I can.
Well, you're a businessman major and a marketing major, so obviously, you know, as I tell the students, you're majoring in BS. So why would you major in BS unless you thought it would get you rich?
Exactly.
All right. So is there anybody in the class who would consider themselves a 10 when it comes to wanting to become rich? That they have so much desire to be rich that they would consider themselves a 10 on a scale of 1 to 10. Anyone? I have no 10s in the class. So, okay. Well, that's all right. All right. And the last question I'll ask regard to this slide is, have you ever seen this book before this class? Okay. All right. Well, let me tell you a little bit about the book before I go into the rest of it. The book is Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill. It's a very, very famous business book. It's been around since the 1930s. It was written during the Great Depression by Napoleon Hill, who was a journalist and writer who came up with the idea of this book. And he befriended a lot of famous people who really were enthusiastic about his writing a book of this nature, which it's one of the first self-help books ever written. The people, and he was able to enlist Carnegie and even Thomas Edison, who all thought that if there were a book out there that talked about the mental state and the mental aspect of accumulating wealth, that this would be something that would be very beneficial for society and for people to know about. So he wrote this. So he had all of their support as he wrote this book, and he used stories from them and talked to them, and basically asked people like Henry Ford, what do you think separates you from somebody who isn't you? And he asked the same of Thomas Edison and Andrew Carnegie, who's a very, very, very famous steel entrepreneur. And he got their answers, and then he took their answers and he formulated it into a kind of a framework or a paradigm for getting rich. And then he presents it in this book. This is what it takes, he's sort of saying. So that's basically what's behind the book in general. It's a very famous book, and many famous people over the years have cited it as a source of inspiration for them as they sought success in life. So here was my first question. Who has a desire to be wealthy? You told me that you are a 7 or an 8. So let me ask you some other questions. What does wealth represent to you? What is being wealthy? What does that mean?
I'd say a lot of us see it as how much money you have and how much like products or that you own.
Wealth is money, right?
You own.
Although, how much do you own? What
yeah,
kind of possessions do you
that's
own,
the word I was looking for.
Right. Yes, and I think that money comes very much into play. However, I think in your careers, you're going to have to think of wealth beyond money. You're going to have to think about wealth as wealth, because money is going to become less and less valuable to you as time goes on. You're living in an environment where money is getting printed like crazy, and so it's going to be more like monopoly. It's going to be more like play money. So wealth will come in many different forms. Bitcoin, there will be digital money, for example, such as Bitcoin and other, wealth of that nature. Gold, silver, antiques, collectibles, all of those things, houses, cars, real estate in various forms, all of those things will represent wealth. But it has to be more than just money. So wealth represents the accumulation of large amounts of possessions. What do you think it takes to become wealthy today?
I would say with like how hard you work and how much you work is like a huge part of it. So the people that are going to put in
do you think it's harder?
What'd you say?
Do you think it's harder today than it has been in the past?
Yes and no, because there are a lot of people who want to be wealthy now, but I feel like, when you and sometimes people were just set up for wealth in a way, like you were just born into it, and it was like I feel like it was easier to stay in it.
Yes, in my opinion, it's easier today than it has been in the past, but I don't believe that but I believe it's easier. There's certainly many people that I observe are becoming wealthy today than I've seen in the past. Most of them are doing it through technology, but it's a good question. What does it take? What do you think it takes? You think it takes desire, connections? I saw connections. Anything else?
Not too much, other than how much hard work you're willing to put in. Like just
it takes a lot of work
in general, because the harder you're willing to work for it and the time consuming, it's like the more you're going to get out of it.
Right. All right. And then here's the key big question. What are you personally willing to do to acquire wealth? And I'll give you some sub questions to this. Number 1, would you alter your physical appearance to become wealthy?
I feel like to a certain extent. So I guess for an example, it's like for a certain interview or something, dressing like a lot more professionally than you would, which I mean, everyone does, but it does help like your appearance, like putting on makeup and how you do your hair and stuff.
Right. I mean, there's a lot of things because obviously we are living in a time of, people taking selfies and being very self-absorbed. So you have to forego some things, I'm not, or maybe you might have to forego some things like a visible tattoo, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or piercings, gauges, whatever else. Certainly beards, hairstyles, man buns, whatever else, right? Some of it depends on the field you're getting into and how you want to become successful. But certainly, if for example, if you want to be successful as a musician, that's one thing. Obviously, and tattoos help you, but in most fields, gauges and tattoos are going to be an obstacle. And of course, if it's more difficult to become wealthy today than it has been in the past, you want to eliminate as many obstacles as possible, right? So it's a question. How much are you willing to alter your physical appearance to become successful? Would you give up your social life?
I think to a certain extent.
Would you break up with with somebody that you loved because you felt that person was an obstacle to your getting rich?
I don't think I would go to that extent of it, but I would go to the extent of like hanging out with friends, even like so many days of the week, like cutting that out to work or something like that. I wouldn't go to I think if they were creating obstacles, I would also just communicate with them. Like, this is what I want. This is what I try to end up. So let's get on the same page.
Right. Would you be willing to forsake your family? If there are people in your family who are toxic to your becoming successful, we all have people in our families who are delusional, mentally deranged, whatever else. They're very negative in terms of how they, affect us. Would you be willing to forsake such people, even if they're very close family members?
I don't think I would cut them out completely, but I think I would limit my time around them if they're having such a negative impact on me. I'd probably obviously they're family, so I would keep them in my life, but I'd probably just reduce the amount of time.
Okay. And then would you be willing to train yourself for becoming wealthy in the same way that a professional athlete trains himself for athletic competition?
Oh, wow. I guess if it's something that I'm really passionate about, I would, but I mean, they put insane hours in. So I don't know if it was to that extent I would, but something close.
Right.
If it's
let me ask you this, and I mean real wealth, financial independence by age 50, wealthy, right? Mm-hmm. To where you'd never have to work for the rest of your life. Some of you might even think age 40, you want that. For me, I always thought age 60. Will you if you do want that kind of wealth, will you be working against people who are willing to train themselves in the same way a professional athlete trains for athletic competition? Will your competitors be working that hard?
Yes.
Will they? Yes? Absolutely, they will be.
Yeah.
So that's what you're up against. If your answer to that question is no, that's what you're up against.
Mm-hmm.
And so that leads to my last question, which is more difficult, to be a successful professional athlete or to be a financially independent multimillionaire by age 60? Which do you think is harder?
I think it depends, because if we were talking about, if you have the connections and you were born into a certain family or set up, I think that's going to be much easier to become the multimillionaire. But they're both going to be very challenging because you just talked about, you're always going to have competitors that are doing the same exact thing and working just as hard as you, if not harder, to get exactly where you need to be. So they're both challenging in their own ways. Same with the professional athlete. You could even be born into oh, my dad was this person and he was an Olympic like athlete or whatever. And he's like,
well, look at
to be good.
yeah. Look at the Manning family. Archie Manning was a quarterback, and then Peyton Manning, his son, and then Eli Manning, his son. And so it does often go in families.
Yeah, it does help.
Well. Right. So I will say this. There are several hundred professional athletes, maybe a few thousand, very successful, let's say. And there are 40 million people in this country who are millionaires. So it's considerably easier to become a successful, wealthy person in the United States than it is to become a professional athlete in the United States.
I think it helps because the one thing with becoming a millionaire is there's more ways to do it. With a professional athlete, you're stuck with like exactly that position and how many people there are. But like, there's so many different ways to become a millionaire in the U.S.
Yes, but the process for becoming is going to be the same. It's all about goal setting and setting objectives, reaching your objectives. All right, so my point of this slide is, if your answer to any of these questions, the first 4 questions here is no, then you must realize that if you want to become wealthy, you're going to be going up against people whose answer was yes. So if your answer is you're not willing to alter your physical appearance, your competitor's answer to that question is going to be yes. If your answer is, I'm not willing to give up my social life, your competitor's answer to that question is yes. I'm not willing to forsake my family. Your competitor's answer to that question is yes. And are they willing to train themselves in the same way that professional athletes train themselves? Your competitor's answer to that question is yes. So, food for thought. How much commitment is required to become wealthy? Hill goes into the story of Edwin Barnes. It's a very interesting story. He's a young man who lived out in the Midwest, I think Iowa or Kansas or somewhere like that. He was familiar with Thomas Edison, and who is, a very famous inventor in the late 19th, early 20th century. And Barnes was just became convinced, I'm going to work for Thomas. He actually had to hop on a freight train to get to Orange, New Jersey. And he hopped on a freight train. He went to Orange, New Jersey, walked into Edison's laboratory, and basically told Edison, I'm going to work for you. I know it. I came here, from Kansas or wherever, and I have nothing, but I just know that I'm going to work for you and I'm going to do, amazing things with you. And Edison looked at him and hired him on the spot. And basically, the reason that Edison said he hired him was that he said that when a man really desires a thing so deeply that he's willing to stake his entire future on a single turn of the wheel in order to get it, he's sure to win. And so Edison hired him, and he worked as an apprentice for Edison for quite some time, many years. And then finally, Edison invented a thing called the dictaphone, which was a big device used in the middle part of the 20th century. In those days, you had to dictate letters to your secretary, and then the secretary would write them. And executives would call their secretary in, and then they'd dictate their letters, and the secretary would write the letter in shorthand. What his machine did, it was allowed the executive to speak into a recording device and record the letter. And Barnes became the executive in charge of marketing that particular device and became very rich as a result of it. Second story is this guy, Darby, R.U. Darby. Darby is a guy who bought a gold mine out in the West somewhere, and he worked the gold mine for a few years himself, dug, never found any gold, gave up, sold the gold mine for pennies on the dollar to a company. They go out there and they find gold within 3 feet of where he stopped. Darby said he always remembered that. that he gave up 3 feet from the point at which there was gold. And so he said that, he started an insurance company later in life. And he said that I stopped 3 feet from gold, but I'll never stop because men say no when I ask them to buy life insurance. So he took that lesson of having failed so close to success and applied it to his regular life. Juliana, do you ever work on, you obviously have, you've taken like math 140 or statistics.
Yeah.
Do you ever get stuck when you're working on an advanced math problem? You're looking at it and you're just going, I don't get this.
Yeah.
Does that ever happen to you?
Yeah.
And the thing you don't know, right, when you're working on it is how long do you have to study it before you are going to get it? Right?
Yeah. Hours.
I mean, there are times I can tell you that for me, it didn't happen until I got into graduate school, but there came times when I was looking at advanced mathematics and trying to figure it out when I thought, I'll never get it. I've reached the level at which I'm not capable of understanding anymore, But I kept working at it, and I did finally figure it out and get through the class, solve the problems or whatever. But that's the thing about life. That's also the thing about wealth and success. You don't know how close you are when you're working on the problem. You don't know how close you are to the solution, But if you give up, you'll never find out. You're going to go through this when you're looking for a job too. It's going to be like really frustrating, and you're just, I'm never going to find a job. I'm never going to find a job. I'm never going to find a job. But you only have to find one, So it will happen. It's just that it's very frustrating because you get to the point of thinking you're never going to get it. And I think one of the things that you learn in college, it's one of the big lessons in college is that you learn that, if I do apply, if I keep working, I will figure it out. You learn how to learn and to get a little more confidence in the fact that if you just push a little harder, it will come, All people that are relevant to this chapter, this guy here, his name is Norton, Ken Norton. Do you know who he was, Juliana?
No. I've heard the name.
He's a boxer, obviously. Yeah. He was a heavyweight champion of the world in the era of Muhammad Ali. So he actually had the heavyweight crown during the Muhammad Ali era. I'm not sure whether he actually ever beat Ali or not. I know they fought maybe more than once, but I don't remember who beat who. But he's a very successful athlete from the 1960s and 70s. Do you know who this is, Damon John?
Mm-mm.
He's a Shark Tank entrepreneur. You've never seen Shark Tank on TV?
I have. I've watched that in like high school. They used to play it in our business classes.
Yeah, there you go. Well, Damon John started a brand called Boo Boo, clothing brand, became multimillionaire. Now he is a entrepreneur on Shark Tank, and this is Barbara Corcoran. She's also a shark. Do you know how she made her money?
I don't know.
Real estate, New York real estate. She became a multimillionaire through real estate in New York. And then this is, of course, Oprah Winfrey. And I think everybody knows who Oprah is, right? Even though she's a boomer. So, but nonetheless, let's not diminish her too much just because she's a boomer. Very successful in media and communications and many other areas. So what do these 4 people have in common? Ken Norton, Damon John, Barbara Corcoran, and Oprah Winfrey. Can you guess, Juliana?
Wealth.
They're all wealthy, that's for sure. The one thing they all have in common is that they swear by this book, Think and Grow Rich. All four of them attribute a great deal of their success to the fact that they read Think and Grow Rich at an early age, and they applied its principles to their life, and it motivated them to become wealthy and successful. So if you go through the book and you're thinking, well, it's not relevant today, no, I can tell you that if you talk to anybody who has accumulated wealth in recent years, not anybody, but a large number of people who have accumulated wealth, who are CEOs and whatever, and you ask them, have you ever heard of this book? A large percentage of them will tell you they know the book, they've read the book. So it is a book that is still used today. It's dated, and we'll talk about where it's dated as we go through, but the principles in the book are timeless. All right, so next question, Juliana. Where does wealth come from?
Like, how do you get wealthy? Or like, are we talking like what is wealth, like with money and like possession wise?
Where does it come from? Where does it come from?
Becoming, working hard to get to where you want.
All right.
It's like you have to earn
I'll
it.
pose this one to the class. Is there anybody in the class who would like to answer this question? Where does wealth come from?
Assets.
Assets. Okay, that's a very practical student answer if I've ever heard one. Anybody else?
I feel as though it comes from a variety of things, because you can't just like really wake up, have $1 million and like be wealthy. You kind of have to have your name out there. So it's not only is it the aspects, but it's the money, like how well you're known, if you're like good, if you're bad, kind of thing. So like kind of based on your reputation almost. Right.
Oh, it's definitely going to be based on your reputation. There's nothing more important to accumulating wealth than having a good reputation. That's super important. But where does it actually start? That's my question. Where is the seed of wealth? Where does the seed of wealth begin? What do you plant first?
Thoughts and actions?
Yeah, your mindset.
Thoughts, your mind. This is where wealth comes from. Wealth comes from your mind. Your life, and this is Napoleon Hill's first point, your life is a manifestation of your thoughts, right? Your life is like this. You have a canvas in front of you and you're an artist, and you have to decide what to paint on that canvas. That's your life. You can decide to paint wealth on that canvas, right? Or you can decide that wealth is not important to me on that canvas. But it's your canvas, it's your life, it's your imagination. And anybody who is wealthy on their own effort, other than those who inherited wealth, anybody who's become wealthy on their own effort had to imagine it first before anything else. So thought is revolutionary right there, particularly in this day and age. But basically, quoting from the book, riches begin with a state of mind, with a definiteness of purpose, with little or no hard work. Notice he says this, little or no hard work. Napoleon Hill basically says that hard work is, you have to have willpower and the willingness to do hard work, but hard work in and of itself is not important. What is important is focus on the right things. You and every other person ought to be interested in knowing how to acquire that state of mind, which will attract riches. So that is Napoleon Hill's premise, that all wealth begins with thought. And his purpose of this book is to talk about thought and the nature of thought and how to get people thinking correctly in terms of how to accumulate wealth. That's basically what this book is going to be about. So do you agree with this, Juliana? wealth, practically everything else that happens to you begins as thought?
I want to say yes, but then I read what about physical disease, and I don't know about that.
You don't believe physical disease begins as thought?
Well, I guess, were you talking about like issues in your head?
Yeah, well, that plus I think you can bring about disease through stress and anxiety very, very easily.
Yeah, I would say yes.
Do you think your relationships with other people begin with thought?
Yes.
What about your perceptions of your own capabilities?
Yeah, I think that's a huge thing too.
All right, so all of that begins with thought.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to run through this because I only have about 5 minutes. I'm going to run through a little quicker, but first rule of wealth is if you want to become wealthy, then you have to focus your mind on becoming wealthy. And in fact, I could put anything there. If you want to become a professional athlete, you have to focus your mind on becoming a professional athlete, right? If you want to be successful as a student, you have to focus your mind on becoming successful as a student, right? So that answer applies to everything. So if you want to become wealthy, you have to focus your mind on becoming wealthy. This is not an easy thing to do, and it is also something that people who are wealthy pay a big price to do, because you have to forego all distractions. That means family, physical possessions, meaning you do without the BMW when you're young so that you can have the BMW when you're older, right? And have it paid for. Fun, and any other interest that doesn't contribute to the end of getting wealthy. If it doesn't apply to your getting wealthy, then you can't focus on it. You can't do it, right? You have to learn the language of wealth, and you have to think in the language of wealth. What is the language of wealth? What language is that, Juliana?
I would say, well, the whole mindset of how to become wealthy, like, and being determined to get there.
I will say, yes.
In that process is the language, like how you think, how you act, what you do.
The language of wealth comes in two key tongues, I guess you'd say. The language of the balance sheet and the language of the income statement. And you must learn those two things. You must learn how to interpret and understand a balance sheet, and you have to learn how to interpret and understand an income statement. If you cannot understand those two things, you cannot become wealthy, because everything having to do with wealth comes from those two things. It's either going to improve your income statement or it's going to improve your balance sheet, because that's what wealth is. It's what appears on those two documents. So you must understand those two documents thoroughly in order to become wealthy. And everything that you do has to be focused on, they apply to you and your personal wealth. You have to develop a plan. You have to reorient your mind into positivity. And you have to accept, and this last one I added, I don't think it's even in the text, the criticism that's going to come your way for believing in capitalism and exploiting opportunities. And I think this is more true of your generation than any generation that has come before. People are being programmed not to accept wealth. Wealth is being shown as a thing that's negative. And since I only have a minute left, I will go toward the end. You're in charge of programming your mind. You. And if you do not program your mind positively, then somebody else is going to program it negatively. That's a fact. It's always been a fact. Napoleon Hill points it out. It's more a fact today than it's ever been, because there are major corporations, huge, giant corporations that are even more powerful than government, that are out there programming you on a daily basis, programming you negatively. So it's a big challenge. I think for your generation more so than previous generations, because there's a lot of negativity to compete with out there. And you cannot, again, if you want to be focused on getting wealthy, you have to be positive. You can't be negative. So it's going to be difficult. And I think one of the things that you have working against you is that as a generation, you're raised in a media environment that has already programmed you negatively, which is very interesting for me as a professor, because when I used to teach this class 25 years ago, I didn't believe that. I didn't believe that I believed that the students that were in front of me were students who were like empty vessels, right? I could pour into there what I needed to pour in there, but I'm negative coming in, right? And so I have to unprogram them, right, from the negativity that they were taught for 20, 22 years through social media and everything else, and reprogram them toward productivity and positivity. Difficult. If you don't believe me, I put a little link in here that talks about self-esteem and what social media does to your self-esteem, to people's self-esteem. But I think we've all pretty much understand that social media has not been a real positive force in terms of raising the self-esteem of individuals. Do you agree with that, Juliana?
Yeah, for sure.
So it's a challenge, but I think even more so, it's more important today than it's ever been, which is why I put this book in this class, because I think it's super important for anybody going into business to understand. Yes, it's old school thinking. Yes, but it's timeless. And just because we have technology, and just because we have Facebook, and just because we have Twitter, it doesn't mean that, you know, the game has fundamentally changed. Balance sheets still exist. Income statements still exist. The game is the same game. So I'll leave you with this quote from Oprah. You become what you believe. You are where you are today in your life based on everything you have believed. You agree with that, Juliana?
Yes, I do.
Have I motivated you a little bit today?
Yes, very much so.
Have you gone from, say, a 7 to an 8?
Yeah. It's
okay, not a 9 though?
Mindset.
Not a 9?
Closer, maybe between 9.
Maybe a 9? All right.
Yeah.
I'll take that. Hopefully by the time we get through this class, you'll stay at it and become a 10.
Yeah, 10, yeah.
And then by the time you're 50, you'll be very, very rich.
Yeah, exactly.
Not necessarily happy, but rich. I will say this, yeah, I'll end with this. You know, I've been rich and poor in my life many, many times. And other than health, which I haven't had to deal with, major health issues, there is no stress in your life worse than poverty, at least for me, and the fear of poverty. So, All right, guys, that's basically introduction. We'll see you all on Monday. From here on out, I really look forward to you guys doing all of the work. And thanks for staying over for a few minutes. Thanks, Juliana. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. Have a good one.
Bye.
That's where you're wrong. There's a market out there greedy for gold, and they don't care where it comes from.
Ah, the sweet smell of an all-day sucker.
Keep a cool head, Carlberg. Don't you need? And more would be great. Well, I guess you could call me greedy.
This is Greedville, the podcast about marketing and so much more. No city limits, no traffic lights, no apologies.